barbaric beheading of American journalist James Foley on YouTube this week should confirm in every American exactly what we face and what we've been fighting in the Middle East. Dozens of human heads stuck on iron fences in Syria, the headless body of a little girl held by her father. These are barbaric atrocities. We were told by our president this enemy was decimated and on the run. Today, I'm releasing a timeline report containing excerpts from congressional testimony. The American public has been deceived. The truth about what Washington knew and when they knew it about the Islamic State and the Levant is found in this report that I'm releasing today. It is clear from these hearings that Brian Higgins knew about the Islamic State and the Levant for the last 4 years, yet he has repeatedly and publicly dismissed this threat as civil wars and internal conflicts when he knew this was instead a caliphate military campaign. Brian Higgins sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee and its subcommittee on the Middle East and North Africa, and the subcommittee on terrorism, non-proliferation, and trade, and the ranking member of the subcommittee on counterterrorism and intelligence, where this testimony is drawn from. The Levant encompasses the island of Cyprus, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, and southern Turkey. Some of these countries possess nuclear weapons. April of 2013, 5 months after President Obama declares the demise of Al-Qaeda, ISIL declares the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. May 2013, Brian Higgins briefed of the worldwide threat if Syrian military-grade weapons fall into the hands of terrorist groups, including the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. June, a month later, 2013, Higgins was briefed of ongoing genocide in Syria and Iraq, of kidnapping and torture and murder of Christians, and was told by experts that a true genocide was taking place. Some of these Christians were refugees from the genocide that was taking place in Iraq under our watch, while our troops were there and we looked away. The American public was never told about this, and the press chose not to report it. The proof is in this report, and we have been deceived. Despite the testimony in June, 3 months later in a radio interview, Mr. Higgins repeated again, quote, "The lesson in Syria, as in Iraq and Afghanistan, is that the people of those countries have to solve their own internal conflicts," and he once again called them civil wars. The following month, the U.S. State Department issued a statement calling ISIL a transnational threat, with Iraq urgently requesting helicopters and munitions. In November, Mr. Higgins is briefed again of the Islamic State and the Levant and the 7 countries it seeks to overtake. Briefed again in December, again on January 1st, 2014, and 3 weeks later, Fallujah fell to ISIL. 1 week later, the president dismissed ISIL as the JV team, saying, quote, "I think there is a distinction between the capacity and the reach of a bin Laden and a network that is actively planning major terrorist plots against the homeland versus jihadists who are engaged in various local power struggles and disputes, often sectarian." February 5th, Mr. Higgins is briefed on the increasing size of ISIL forces and the, quote, "deeper symbolic meaning for Americans." CIA Director John Brennan warns Mr. Higgins' committee that ISIL poses a serious threat to the U.S. June 10th, 4 months later, Mosul violently falls to ISIL. June 11th, the very next day, President Obama declares the world less violent and more tolerant than it has ever been. June, July, and August, horrific, barbaric violence appeared on our TV screens as ISIL continued its goal of bloody caliphate by force. June 17th, 6 days later, Brian Higgins gives an interview on WBFO saying this is just a Sunni versus Shia Kurd problem in Iraq, never mentioning the genocide or the goal of the Islamic State Caliphate and the serious threat those countries. July, the Washington Post declares even Genghis Khan didn't do this. August 8th, after months of slaughter, President Obama announces limited airstrikes. August 10th, Brian Higgins on WBEN again states the Islamic State expansion just common civil wars. Yesterday, Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel stated this is an organization that has an apocalyptic end-of-days vision that will eventually have to be defeated. They now have an estimated 17,000 fighters, and they are embedded in every little town in Iraq surrounding Baghdad. The president's containment rather than defeat policy is not and will not work. I want to challenge Mr. Higgins, now that the truth is out, to publicly recognize that this is not a civil war, but a caliphate movement by outsiders. He should be using his bully pulpit to loudly denounce this genocide. Brian Higgins' silence is unacceptable in the face of genocide. We cannot afford to have a congressman that refuses to recognize threats to America. A year ago, when Congress realized Sunni, Shia, and Christians were being slaughtered by the Islamic State of Iraq, we should have been forming a worldwide coalition of countries to take action against this. America can no longer sit silent while the president plays golf and Mr. Higgins stays silent. Mr. Foley's executioner has called out our president by name, warning him not to interfere with what they are doing. They have said they will not stop until their flag flies over our White House. The year-old testimony to Congress is that ISIL is actively recruiting terrorists to operate inside the U.S. I call on Mr. Higgins to form an international coalition based on the committees he sits on. He needs to stop focusing on trees on the waterfront for 5 minutes and take care of business in Washington.